Hey everyone, Jonah from Dropgun Samples here with a special new tutorial for you today. I'm going to show you how to create a killer drop using our new Vocal Tech House pack. This pack includes a variety of vocal samples, drum, effects, percussion, bass, synth samples, serum presets, and even MIDI files that'll help you craft a unique and professional sounding tech house track. We're going to be creating this drop together, so I'm going to be walking you through the process step by step. As always, make sure you subscribe for more tutorials like this, and let's get started on making that drop. So to start this off, let's look through this pack for a vocal. I have a simple template open here in Logic with a bunch of just unprocessed channels ready for me to load these files onto and move quickly through. Jumping into the vocal loop section, we have all of these folders containing construction pieces of the vocals for their respective songs. So let's check some of these out.
In my body like downtown, here we go, dancing all fading lights coming down. Say we gave it a go run. Yeah.
I like this one, 126 beats per minute, F minor. Let's use it. So immediately from what I hear with this vocal, it needs to be scooted forward a beat so that the vocal can start on the perfect time with the downbeat. I'm going to turn on a metronome so we could hear that.
Fading lights coming down. Say we gave it a go run. Yeah.
So if you notice, I have gain staged this a little bit. It's currently reading at negative 10.6 decibels. I do this early on so that I can get my mix dialed in and leave enough headroom for my mix and master process. To compensate, I just went ahead on the master and added 6 decibels and a utility gain just so that we can hear everything right now. And now that we have the vocal in place, we can start looking for a kick. Let's go into drum one shots, look at some kicks. These are all some really great kicks. I do like to find a kick that I have to add minimal processing to. I don't like to do too much to it, generally just an EQ. I think I really like this one called Book. So let's work this one into the project. I like to get in there with a nice fade. I think this is ending at a good spot, but just to make sure that your kicks are all kind of trailing off nicely, get a little fade on there with some curvature. For gain staging, I do like to have my kick sit around negative 11 decibels, negative 10.5, somewhere in between there. Should be good. For any mixing, I'll just add an EQ to the kick. I like to check out some of these frequencies, maybe make sure that there's a roll off around 2000 hertz or so. Now, it doesn't look like I need to add anything to the high end, like I need to roll off anything. This kick is really nice and controlled. As you can see, when I add this low cut to the kick, it is increasing the volume of the kick. There's really not much you could do in this situation. This is linear phase distortion. This is happening because there's a time difference between the signal on this side of the EQ and the signal on this side of the EQ. However, what I am noticing is that this kick is really clean to begin with. It's rolling off nice right below 40 hertz, so I don't think there's too much I need to do on an EQ. Now right away, since I added a kick to the project, the first thing I'm going to do is add sidechain to all the channels that need it. And since I have all of these channels in groups, the only places I need to add it are on these overlaying groups. So we're going to start with the vocals, and I'm going to use LFO tool for this. For the vocals, I like to pick up my floor just below 50%. For my synth and bass, I do like my floor relatively low, somewhere on this last kind of square of LFO tool works for me. And then on my tops and effects group, for my floor, I like to generally have that around 25% of the window. One thing you'll notice is that standard on all of my LFO tool instances is this high pass filter right here. When you click on this window, the filter will come up. What this high pass filter does is basically cut the sub out of any sound that's routing through this LFO tool whenever the cycle goes around. So if you watch while I play it.
Fading lights coming down. Say we gave it a go run. Yeah.
For this, I'll actually create a second LFO shape, an LFO2, that's actually hitting the bottom floor and it's a little bit tighter. I'll go over into LFO routing and change the cutoff routing to LFO2 and bring that down around 70 to 80. This will allow that high pass filter to sweep every single time the LFO jumps down. The main reason I do this is so that I can let my sounds breathe through the LFO tool a little bit without worrying about the sub part of them clashing with the kick. So now that we have a kick and a vocal, let's go into this pack and look for a good clap. I'm looking in the clap section of drum one shots and let's see what we like here. Good one.
Fading lights coming down. So we give it a go run.
So I gain stage this clap back. I'm looking for it to be just behind the kick, but not too far behind. Some things I look for on the claps are a roll off of no lower than about 300 hertz and a nice controlled body through a transient shaper. So I'm going to start with that transient shaper. This free transient shaper by Kilohertz is part of their essentials bundle, which you can grab from their website for free. And it's really great for maintaining percussion and drum sounds and really just controlling the tail and attack of them.
Fading lights coming down. So we give it a go run. All the sounds dance with me until we see.
Now let's jump into that EQ, and I'm just going to make sure that the frequencies are rolling off around 300 or there's no sub frequencies leaking out.
Lights coming down. So we give it a go run. Yeah, yeah. Feel the night, all the sounds. Dance with me until we see the sun. Fading lights coming down. So we give it a go run. Yeah, yeah.
So we've got a vocal, a kick, and a clap. Let's look through some of these bass presets and try to get a bass line in the track. It's important to understand what you're trying to do with the song before you start aimlessly shuffling through presets. Otherwise, you might lose inspiration pretty quick. That's why I like to start by laying out a very simple MIDI sequence that reflects the type of bass line that I'm trying to use before I even look through presets. And for this song, I'm going for more of a stab or pluck bass, so I'm going to start with a simple sequence on the root note of F like this. Now that we have just something in place, we can start going through the presets in Vocal Tech House and see what matches up. So here are my Vocal Tech House basses. Let's try some of these out. I really do like that one already. Let's try some other ones. They're all really working pretty great. I think I'm going to call back to one of these donk basses up here. Let's go with that first one. So I'm going to go into the MIDI now, look for some different steps I could take with the bass line to make the melody more interesting. Let's keep it a little more melodic here. Taking this over here. The low 10th. See what other notes we can move around here. Let's try switching these notes around. Not sure how I feel about this 7th yet. Maybe let's try taking this up an octave. Like that. Maybe let's try this. I think that's the winner. This is a great way to start the bass. This preset pack actually also comes with some awesome sub presets, so let's look through some of those and see what we can do to stack this up and make it sound nice and full. Right away, before I add sub, I'm going to cut off the sub frequencies from the main bass so that we don't get any clashing. So now moving into the sub layer, I'm going to copy the MIDI down to this new bass patch. Right away, I'm going to add an EQ and I'm going to cut off some of those frequencies that might end up clashing with the main layer. Moving into Serum, let's try out some of these sub basses. We have this one called Follow Sub. Oh, that's nice. I think this is the winner right here, No Sub.
Did I go on? Yeah, yeah. Feel the night, all the sounds. Dance with me until we see the sun. Fading lights come.
So this is sounding really great. Relative to my kick being between -10.5 and -11, I like to have my sub around -14 or -17, somewhere in that range, depending on the key of the song. And then my main bass will be just behind the kick that's layered in. You're gonna have to logarithmically scale those levels if you gain stage differently, but this is a great way to start and then branch out from there and find a place that's great for you. So let's process this main bass a little bit. I think I could use just a slight amount of saturation. For this, I'm gonna use Isotope Neutron 3, and you're actually able to create multiple bands and saturate them a little bit differently. Need one more presence out of that band. Little tube distortion. We'll do some warm distortion on the bottom, just a little bit. It's really just helping with the presence of the sound without adding too much to the overall volume.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run. Yeah, yeah.
Next thing I'm going to add is some multi-band compression, and what this is going to do is maintain those peaks. Like when it steps up to this high octave note up here, it's going to make sure that it doesn't spike too much in the volume on those notes. I'm going to draw some bands that are separating the lowest frequencies and the highest frequencies, and going to try to isolate the tallest peaks of each band. This band's pretty controlled. With a stab bass like this, you want a pretty quick attack, a pretty quick release. Ratios are always generally safe around 2.8 to 4 to 1, basically. So we're going to go about 3.1, 3.2 on all these. Check out this mid band. There, we're getting some movement. Now we'll look at this low band, which shouldn't have too much action. We just want to make sure that that one little spike is being taken care of. And there it is.
Dance with me until we see the sun.
There's obviously numerous ways that you can get creative with this bass. You can always process it in different ways and add different effects. For the sake of this video, I'm going to add an EQ just to clean it up. Let's use FabFilter Pro Q3. We're just going to kind of maintain the rest of those peaks, maybe use a little bit of its dynamics to calm things down. Like right there. Draw my notch, make it dynamic, and then wait for that peak right there. Yep. Looks good. So we're sounding great with this bass line right now. It is time to liven up this beat with some more percussion. So now let's move into tops. I have a sampler here loaded with all of the hi-hats from our Vocal Tech House pack. I'm going to open up a MIDI and start mapping them out. I usually like to pick one strong open sample to start with, and I'll decide if I want to keep it, repitch it, or anything like that once I hear it in the beat.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run. Yeah, yeah.
This one's sounding pretty good. I'm going to look through some other ones and see if I want to change it, but I'm going to note that F sharp 3 is a good one.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run. Yeah. Feel the night.
I really like F as well.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run. Yeah.
And I like the attack of this one. So here's something I like to do. Go into the sampler for it and actually shorten it up till I only get the attack of this hi-hat. I'll then go into the other hi-hat in which I like the body more. See, I don't like this attack. It's got a little bit too much low-end punch. I'm going to pull it off with some fade. Maybe cut some of it off. Now you can kind of find a way to layer them together without clashing. Maybe tune this one up a little bit.
Say we give it a go run. Yeah. Feel the night.
Since we have this sidechain, we can add a closed hat right on the downbeat to kind of emphasize that downbeat.
Fading lights coming down. Fading lights coming down.
Let's add some extra offbeat hats to get a little bit of groove going now. I'm going to copy these over onto another hi-hat. Bring the velocity down.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run. Yeah.
What you can do here is some variation in the velocity in different spots to kind of give it a little bit different feel on each hit.
Fading lights coming down. Say we give it a go run.
Another thing you could do is try to incorporate another closed hi-hat.
Fading lights coming down.
Some more adjustments to the velocity. So maybe every other hi-hat, this one gets louder and the other one's quieter. It's always good to look for a little accentuation to keep it varying from time to time. Let's double the size of this and copy everything over. Over here, I like to find another little variation, something in the open hi-hats that kind of throws it off a little bit. Can bring that down in velocity a little bit. And finally, I'm feeling a little bit of swing for this track, so let's go in and change the grid quantize to 1/16 swing B. I'm going to go ahead and do that in the bass line as well to make sure that we're staying consistent. One thing that really helps your mix down is if you're panning some of these hi-hat samples, so it really helps to go into your sampler and choose some hi-hats to just go randomly left and right and make sure that everything's not dead center in your mix. Something I like to do for the mixing on my hi-hats right away is add a saturator, more specifically a little bit of tape saturation in these high and mid bands. If you've ever listened to a song and it's just a lone beat with the hi-hat and no bass line or any synths or anything, and the sound is kind of spiking through your ears, this is a good way to help that a little bit. Because using saturation actually adds color. It doesn't just increase the volume of any sound. So here I'm going to add a little bit of tape saturation to the highest band. It really just smoothed things out for me. Of course, we have to gain stage it, so we're sitting at -7.8. Let's pull that back about 4 decibels. -11.5 is a great place to be. Finally, make sure you roll off the bottom of your hi-hats with a low cut. Right there looks about good for me. After hi-hats, I always like to make sure I have at least one tambourine or shaker in the mix. Let's go through our percussion loops. We have a few shakers here. I like this middle one. It's got some tambourine to it, some shaker. This is going to fill the space nicely. This file's tempo is 124, so the first thing I'm going to do is lock it onto my grid. And then I'm also going to quantize it and make sure that it's following the same quantization as the rest of my track. The first thing I like to add to shakers is also a transient shaper. Let's use that kilohertz one again and just pull down some of the tails of this. And then you also have to pull some of those lows out and make sure it's nice and tight on the EQ. I do like to have my shakers and tambourines pretty far back in the mix. Anywhere between -16 and below is going to be good. Let's bring that vocal back in. Now let's continue with the tops by looking at some of these other percussion loops from the pack that can help us accentuate the beat a little bit more. Let's go with this percussion rim loop, and I have some percussion channels ready to go. Right away, this sample is 124 beats per minute, so I'm also going to make sure that this is on grid. And let's get it quantized to our 1/16 B as well. Get a nice low cut on there to make sure it's not interfering. Never hurts to add a transient shaper in the similar way that we did with the shaker. I think to round out the tops, I just want to find one extra percussion like a clap that can fill in some of these gaps. For these extra claps, I look for something that can be a little bit shorter and less present. So I'm going to look for some spaces in between this percussion starting here. Too soon, maybe drag it over here. Like that one. And then we can drag one right there. And then back right there to finish off the loop, because that would keep it consistent. Now, what I like to do is create a full section of this by just joining a large group of it. What you can do from there is trim off the extra pieces, go into your quantization, and make sure that this is also following your swing grid rather than trying to do it manually. Let's give this a nice pan to one way, a little bit of a low cut. And loop it out. So without any instruments, here is our full beat with the tops. Usually for my tops percussion, anything that's not the shaker, the hi-hat, or the ride cymbal, I'm looking for something that's about 4 or 5 decibels behind my kick. Let's get this full beat one more time. A lot of times you're going to have drops that have vocals, but sometimes you're going to want drops that are more focused on leads and sound design. So let's expand this drop, let's scoot the vocals over, and let's focus on some leads. I'm going to copy this drop over. Let's get this vocal to the next section so we could just focus on a section of this drop without any distraction. So for this first lead, I think it's easiest to just focus on something that follows the bass line, and from there you can decide what you want to do with it. I'm going to copy the bass line into this lead section, just for one bar. Maybe take off this last note. Just setting a loop for this lead, and let's shuffle through some of these and see what we like. That one's pretty cool. Let's try it an octave down. Really like that. Sometimes it's nice if you want to step some notes off. You can start by going octaves and then try to get more comfortable with melody. That last note isn't coming through too much. That's pretty cool right there. That's a great place to start. Let's duplicate this lead and get a second one in there. And while going through these leads, I heard this cool pluck and I think this is going to work great. Let's expand that. Go into the pitch bend. I'm going to take this down -12. And let's automate the pitch on the end of it. We can try, if you're ever not happy with how -12 sounds in your pitch bend, you can try -5. Make a slight adjustment to this movement, make it go slower. There you go. Now, really quickly, I want to go into a little bit of mixing on these. There's not too much you could do with a sound that has delay and reverb programmed to the synth, but I would like to work in a Pro Q3 just to make sure that these peaks are maintained. I'm going to cut off the low so that it's not going to clash with the bass. Maybe cut down in the high mids up here a little bit. Roll off some of the highs. There's obviously much more you could do. I think this is sitting well in the mix at the moment, so I'm going to move on to this other lead. With something like this, we can get a lot more surgical. I'm going to start with this exciter again. Little tape saturation on the high band. Bring the mix down. I'm going to try some of this tube saturation on this mid. And just a little bit of tube saturation on the low. This is just really kind of bringing that presence up. I'm going to get a FabFilter Pro Q going for a similar approach with the other synths, just to make sure that these peaks are maintained. Always start with a low cut and make sure it's not clashing with your sub. This little area right here could be maintained a little bit. Just looking for those peaks, making sure that this isn't sticking out unnecessarily wherever it doesn't need to. A little bit of high band roll off. I think we're looking great there. One thing you could do to a sustained sound like this is automate some sort of modulation effect on through it. So with this, I'm going to take an approach with one of my favorite free plugins. Just before my EQ, I'm going to add this Finisher Micro by UJam. This is a great modulation plugin with a bunch of random presets that don't exactly tell you what they do, but add some awesome effects to your sound. So I highly suggest you grab it. It's free from their website and test it out a little bit. One of my favorite ones is the frequency shifter preset. Another great one is jet plane, which is kind of like a flanger. I think that'll be a great one to automate. These leads are working great and you can work them into the project however you like. But for now, let's jump into the sample pack and check out some synth one-shots. Here we have the melodic one-shots folder here where you'll find bass and synths, and let's check some of these out. Ooh, I really like this one. I'm gonna drop this into my project. So knowing that it's in C, I know that I need to take it up 5 steps from its root. So I'm gonna transpose it up 5 steps. If you're in Logic, make sure that you're in polyphonic when you're doing this. Take this over here. You know what? I kind of think that this belongs over here and this belongs over here. Let's try that out. Maybe fix this melody resolution. Let's try repeating that on the next bar and get a little bit of a groove out of it. All right, that's sounding great. I think one thing that we could do with this synth, obviously, is cut some of those lows out. Another great effect on a sound like this is called a reverb throw. Essentially, with a reverb throw, what you're going to do is have a reverb start with a very low percentage wet, if any at all, and then have it automate up really fast and bring a ton of reverb into the mix so that it creates a sweeping effect. I'm going to set a reverb with a long decay, no pre-delay, maybe cut the highs off a little bit, and then I'm going to automate the mix. So you want to make sure it jumps right back down when it needs to play next. Probably going to have to get a slightly longer reverb out of it. And then I'm going to make sure to copy that over to the next section. And then let's also try it right here. We have some leads, we have some synths, bassline, kick, clap, vocal. I think a great way to introduce this drop would be a little bit of a false drop over the segment that has the first lead. So now let's focus on a false drop. For this, I'm immediately going to cut the bass off for the time that the lead is happening. Maybe we can get rid of the clap and get rid of all the percussions. Let's see how that sounds. Sounding good so far. What I'm going to do is mute this last kick. Let's bring the clap in. Let's get a little bit of a sweep going. What I'm going to do is duplicate this clap channel. We're going to bring the clap down, and I'm going to use my Logic selection-based processing to add some reverb to this clap. Now, if you are in Ableton, you can always resample it with some reverb on it. If you're in FL, you could do the same. What I like to do is just get a version of the clap, or a version of whatever sound it is with some reverb, and then reverse it right into the sound that is on that false drop and transitioning it to when the drop actually comes in. So let's grab this, reverse it. Always make sure that you add some fade on these sounds. All right. I think what this false drop needs to flow into the full drop a little bit better is a fill, so let's jump into our sample pack and see what we can get. We have the fill one-shot section here. Let's grab this quick little clap here, go down to our percussion section. It's 125 beats per minute. I'm just going to flex it over to the grid. I'm going to use those 2 claps as a fill right on the end here. Let's make sure that the lows are cut out of those claps and there's not too much more you need to do. You can pan them a little bit. Let's hear how that sounds. And the last piece that this false drop needs to really flow is a nice crash cymbal to sell the impact on the drop. I'm going to jump into the cymbal one-shots of our pack and see what I could find. I like this one called Drive. I'm going to drop it onto the channel, make sure it's gain stage. Let's get an EQ on there, just absolutely making sure we're cutting out the lows, cutting some of those hissy highs off, and let's hear how that sounds. I'd like to try to get one more sound in this section before we move on, so I'm going to look at some of these vocal one-shots or maybe an ad-lib and see what we can get in there. Over here in the folder that I got the vocal from, we actually have these vocal riffs.
Yeah.
I think it's going to do well in this section over here where there's nothing else really happening. Let's try that out. Since this vocal shot is happening over here, let's play around with the pitch, maybe the formant, and see what we can get out of it. For this, I'm going to use Soundtoy's Little Altar Boy. Just a slight drop in the formant. Let's add some reverb to that to make it mix into the room a little bit better. So I believe that we fit everything that we can into this little section before the vocal, but I think it's important that we focus on a little bit of a fill that leads us into the vocal section so it's not so abruptly coming in. So with that said, let's look at a mid-drop fill. I like to start my fills by focusing on the kicks. I decide which kicks I want to keep, which ones I want to remove. A great place to start is by removing the final 2 kicks. And for the first 2 kicks, I will go into my processing. Whether you want to do this in automation or selection-based processing, that's up to you. But I'm going to cut off about 140 hertz. Now we should have a high pass kick. Next, I like to cut the sub off in this section. Another thing we could do is make sure that the percussion in this section is a little bit more maintained. So what I'm going to do is grab all of these, the shaker, these extra percussions. I'm going to go into my selection-based processing and actually jump into that kilohertz transient shaper. Let's bring the sustain down pretty significantly, make it a fast transient shape, and apply it. You can also go in and bring down the gain of these samples a little bit so they're not so jarring and you have some space to work with a fill. It's always good practice to try to cut off the last beat of some of those percussions and make sure you leave space for the extra drum fills that you bring in. Another good option is to cut off the final notes of your main bass to not only make sure that there's enough space for the fill, but to also make sure that the next part of the drop has a really solid impact on the downbeat. Wherever you pull your kick out, it's always a good idea to turn off the sidechain on every one of your channels and get in the practice of that. So I'm going to draw an automation for my depth on LFO tool. I created an anchor point right here where I can just copy and paste this down to any channel that has the LFO tool on it. Let's go back into our pack and find another good drum fill for this section. Moving into the drum one shots with the fills, let's check out from the bottom this time. I like that one. Let's try that out. This one's at 126 beats per minute, so we could leave it. I think I'm going to scoot it over so it really ends on that final section. Since we do have all of these percussions here, it might clash a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead, add an EQ, make sure those lows are cut off, add a high cut, and then I'm actually going to automate that high cut throughout the fill to make sure that it's not really interfering with the other samples while it's playing. Let's move that crash cymbal over. So let's duplicate that crash cymbal channel, copy it down, and process in some reverb so we could do a sweep on that as well. I'm going to cut off the front of it that might contain the original sample. I'm just going for the reverb. Pull this back about 2 bars, cut it off, reverse it. Remember to always hit it with a fade in. And let's try that out. Sounds pretty great. Now let's check that out in its entirety. We have a nice core for a drop here. However, this sample pack doesn't only contain sounds for your drop, it contains sounds for your entire track. So I want to include a little bit extra to lead us into the drop. So with that said, let's do a little bit of focus on a build-up. The first thing I'm going to do for this build-up is duplicate my bassline track and copy the MIDI down. We're going to cut that last bar off, and I'm going to go into Serum and make some adjustments. It's good during your breaks and build-ups to not have your bass be as aggressive if you're going to include your bass in that section, just to kind of create some contrast between the break and the drop. Right now, envelopes 2 and 3 are controlling the donk of the donk bass. Envelope 3 is controlling a pitch movement. I'm going to bring that down. I'm also going to bring some of the cutoff movement down on the filter. I noticed that it says buildup right here on this knob. Let's try that out. That's a great little macro to incorporate in our buildup and probably into our drop as well. Let's go in and automate that macro up. And while we're at it, why don't we go and automate that macro right in our drop for our fill, just to make sure that we have a nice movement going on. Works great. Another great thing for your buildups is to actually take your lead that starts on the drop and use it for a reverb sweep. Let's take this lead down to audio, grab that first note, and process some reverb into it. I'm going to cut some of that off, move it over somewhere in my buildup, make sure it stops right at the same part as the rest of it, reverse it, always add your fade-ins, and let's hear that play. I would like to have no sidechain on my buildup for this one. Let's go ahead and do that on all the channels. There's some great drums for buildups in this pack, so let's look through some of those. Let's move into the audio loops. You can go to drum loops and fill loops, and that's going to give you some nice snare rolls. Let's try this one out. I'm going to create a snare roll channel down here, drop this in. It is telling me that it's 122 beats per minute, so I'm going to make sure that it is reading on grid. Let's try to match the swing of our track. With this, I would also like to automate an EQ, probably cut off some of the lows, get some high cut going, and automate that up until about 3/4 through the drop. Maintain some of those peaks. Let's look through some of these vocal samples from the same folder and see if we can find anything to lay over the buildup. There's some different versions of this, pitched down and pitched up, and we can find something that fits our needs.
Fading lights coming down. Fading lights coming down.
Fading lights.
Fading lights coming down.
I think I want to use one of these lower pitched vocals.
Fading lights coming down. Sorry, give it a go on. Feel the night, all the sounds. Dance with me until we see the sun.
I think one of the last pieces that we're going to need for this is some good effects to round it out, and there's some great effects samples in this pack as well. Let's go into effects one-shots and look at the risers here. You can never go wrong with some white noise. Looks like this one is finishing off at 126 beats per minute. Let's cut off the back of it and just make sure it ends when everything else ends. I also like to cut the lows off of my white noise, tame a little bit of the highs. Same thing as the crash.
Fading lights coming down. Sorry, give it a go on. Feel the night, all the
of the things we could do is cut off the end of this fill and actually look through those drum fills, those one-shot fills, and see if there's one that maybe stands out to us a little bit more. I really like this tom fill. Let's try that out. We know it's 125 beats per minute. I'm going to make sure it's locked onto my grid. We can see what it's like when we adjust it for the swing and try that out. Alright, so we have a great foundation for a build-up and a drop using only sounds from this pack. Now, let's go back and listen to our work one more time. And that's going to be a wrap for today's video. I hope you've learned a lot and seen that you could use our Vocal Tech House pack to make a fire track. Remember that you can grab this pack and all of our others through our website. The link for that is in the description below. And don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions. Remember to follow us on Instagram, Discord, and TikTok for more amazing tips and resources. And leave a like to support the channel. Thanks for watching. Keep creating and pushing the boundaries of your skills in the studio and in life. We hope to see you next time.